Hello and welcome to another session of LinkedIn Live. Today we're going to talk about SAP Fiori security, specifically about authorization debugging. So I want to talk about how we can debug authorization issues or issues that look like they're coming from missing authorizations or something that doesn't work. And it appears to the end user that security, the authorization team, they made some changes that impacted their authorizations and therefore the Fiori doesn't work. So we'll talk about that today. As always, I have a couple of slides prepared. So we're going to go through a couple of slides. And then I also want to jump into the system to show you a little bit more specifically in a live demo how we can, find out certain things that are related to authorizations. And specifically if there's any issues with it, something like SU53, how can we do that in Fiori? How can we see, what are services that are not working properly, and so on. As always, just for 1 minute, a little bit about us. Who are we? What do we do? And then we'll jump right into the topic to talk about Fiori. Fiori is a hot topic right now, and that's why I definitely want to get the majority of time spent around Fiori security. Just very briefly, who is exciting? What do we do? We've been around since 2008. We were founded in Switzerland. We are an SAP Gold partner. We provide services in the area of consulting. So we do consulting services in GRC, authorizations management, SAP Fiori security, HANA database, SAP IDM, SAP Signals, and on, and also SAP Cloud security. We also offer security software solutions that are an add-on to SAP. We're a SAP Gold partner. We're also, all our solutions are SAP certified. So everything that we do follows 100% SAP standard. We have solutions in the area of access governance and compliance when it goes around, risk analysis, SOD scans, critical authorizations, elevated access like firefighter type scenarios. We have code scanners that help us scan custom code, partner code to find vulnerabilities, but also security related information when it comes to, custom code to assess custom reports, custom programs, custom transactions, and also partner transactions, for example, from an access governance perspective. We do and have tools in the area of security monitoring when it comes to enable real-time alerting, real-time monitoring of the SAP system, centralized solutions to monitor the entire landscape. We have different tools in the area of interface security when it comes to RFCs. RFC hardening is a big topic for us. Then obviously the entire authorizations management when it goes to S/4HANA migrations, Fiori implementations, role testing, role implementations, go lives. How can we do? How can we soften the impact of a go live? Fallback scenarios. A lot of tools in the area of must changes, must updating roles, must updating users. Everything that we can do more efficiently. That's what our tools provide as well. Last but not least, also we have tools in the area of identity access management when it comes to workflow solutions for user provisioning, user changes, access provisioning workflows that are also included with SOD scans, what if analysis, simulations, user access reviews, recertification of access. All that also is part of our solution offering. As I mentioned, all our solutions follow 100% SAP standard. That's why we're SAP certified. That's also why we're an SAP Gold partner, because we truly believe in best practices. That's what we preach, and it's also what our tools enable us and our customers to do. With that being said, let's jump into the topic of Fiori. Fiori goes into the authorizations management primarily. We have a lot of tools when it comes to Fiori. We had a session 3 weeks ago, I think, when we talked about automation and must tools for Fiori, where we can must create catalogs, where we can must create groups, spaces, pages, sections. We can must update, must delete, must map, everything in mass, with our replication tools. So when it comes to Fiori, obviously we're not only implementing Fiori, we also have to maintain Fiori. And maintaining Fiori means there might be, authorization issues. There might be situations where the end user has a problem that needs to be solved. And those problems can happen in different places. With Fiori, we remember here on the first slide, we remember that we have a little bit of different architecture than we're used to from the SAP GUI when we're just using, SAP GUI transactions, for example. We have the front-end server and we also have the back-end server. Now, depending on the deployment, we either have a central hub deployment where we have a dedicated front-end server and then back-end server as a separate system, Or we can have, and that's the recommended approach, we can have that embedded approach where we have front-end and back-end on the same system. So, our S/4HANA, for example, can be the front-end as well as the back-end. Regardless of the scenario, there's still components that are front-end components, and there are components that are back-end components. So, for example, when we talk about authorizing tiles or cards, however you want to call them, on the Fiori Launchpad, the user needs certain front-end components like the catalog, the group, the pages, spaces, and so on. And all that is front-end related, so it needs to be built on the front-end. There's front-end services that need to be enabled, and so on. And then on the back-end as well, we have back-end components, we have the OData services that are consumed by the applications, and so on. So there's a lot of different places where something can go or can potentially go wrong, and that's what we need to understand, especially when there's an issue, when there's what the user thinks is an authorization issue. It's not always necessarily an authorization issue. It could also be missing configuration, service is not active, or whatever the case might be. It's not always authorizations related. And that's what I want to get into today, to get a good understanding, what can we do if there are, the issues, and also so that we know as a security admin what is truly authorization related and what is something else, because the something else needs to be fixed as well. But might not be to update a role or authorize the user. It might be to activate a service or whatever the case might be. So let's talk about that today. What are the most common issues that we have seen over the years? First of all, it's like a customer or a user, they report that they're missing tiles or they're missing groups, they're missing a space, a page. They don't see something that they're expecting to see on the Launchpad. That's one sort of issue. It could be that we have issues, and first of all, how can it happen? That can happen because they're missing authorizations. That can be because they're doing something with the personalization, or they don't have the authorizations at all. There are different reasons why a user might not see a tile on the Launchpad. It can also be that they see the tiles, but the tiles are not functional. That can be due to an inactive service, or some SICF nodes are not active. That's can happen. If that happens, obviously then every user has the same issue. So there's also that type of error that can be. Then we have something that's, I would say, rather new with Fiori, but also with S/4HANA, and those are the CDS views, the core data services. Where the approach to the authorization check is a little bit different than it was before. So we'll talk about that, what that means, and how we can find the root cause of why I cannot see some data that are coming from a CDS view, and why is it not showing me SU53 authorization type error. We're showing that. Then truly, obviously, the missing authorizations, that can always be a case. It's just not authorized, and that's why I cannot see it. But then also configuration-related information, or configuration-related situations, like if the system alias is wrongly maintained, and there's a lot of things that can happen that cause something that looks like an authorization issue, where the user just cannot run a Fiori application, for example. So let's look into these. Let's see how we can go about them, how we can understand what's authorizations, what's maybe more configuration, what's more service-related, so that we have a better understanding. Also here, especially when it comes to the missing services that are not activated, or SICF nodes that are not active, I would say that was more a problem like a couple of years ago than it is now, because now we have different ways to implement Fiori. We have the task list in ST01, where we can activate all the services and the content for Fiori through a task list. So it's less likely that we're going to miss something, versus before we had to do it manually. So there was always a chance that we missed the service or didn't activate it properly. Now with the task list, it's a much better approach. It's more efficient, obviously, but also the task list does what it's supposed to do. It activates everything. So it's less likely to experience those issues. Nevertheless, it still can happen. It can happen for various reasons. And that's why it's important to understand. It cannot only happen in a productive environment where it shouldn't happen, but it could potentially. It's also maybe more on a sandbox or a test environment where we're testing new functionality, and you're wondering why it doesn't work. It could be because of that. So let's look into that. Let's try to understand. And also let's talk a little bit about the tools that we can use to troubleshoot any type of authorization type or issues that a user might face. First of all, as we remember with Fiori, Fiori is still based on ABAP system. So there's still the tools that we're used to, like the authorization tracer, system trace from transaction or ST01, but then the modern version, the ST auth trace, which is basically the system trace and then the authorization type trace for it that we can use. But also SU53, where we can find authorization related issues if a user truly is missing authorization. So that is still there. We can still trace users 100%. We can also use the newer traces like the ST USOB trace, the user object trace, as well as the ST user trace. All those traces, they also support to be used with Fiori. And primarily, we're going to use those on the backend system. So if we have a central hub deployment where we have front end and backend, the tracing, if a user has authorization issues, that's very likely to be in the backend, because we remember from previous sessions on the front end, there's no business authorizations. It's really just whether I can see the tile or not. That's what comes from the front end. The rest of the authorizations is pretty much in the backend. Obviously, with Fiori, with the gateway and the communication, there can be on the front end, there can be issues. There can be issues on the back end. That's why we have error log transactions from the gateway that we can run on the front end as well as on the back end. There might also be connectivity, or not connectivity, more like authorization issues between the front end and the back end, where the user is missing trusted RFC authorizations through S_RFC ACL can be an issue. And then also, obviously, just the typical errors where we have, applications that don't work, where we have a system log entry, applications running a dump. The application log in SLG1 might be a good source to find if something doesn't work. We could even use the HTTP trace. And then also, last but not least, the developer tools in the browser. So with Fiori being, in the browser, there's a lot of stuff happening on the browser level that we can see. So we can look into the console. That's a part of the developer tools, where we can see what's being called, what's happening, what's happening from a network perspective. And there we can see, if a service is not available, there's an entry in the developer tools in the console that says, hey, service not available or not authorized. We can also see those type of errors in the developer tools of the browser. So if you're using Chrome or Internet Explorer or Edge, they come as a developer tool, and that one we can also use. And I'll show an example there as well, how that looks like. So there's different type of tools that we can still use. Some that we're very familiar with, some others like the developer tools, obviously something new. We haven't had that in the past with the sub GUI, as well as like the gateway logs. That's something that's new that we just have to be aware of. But if we know the tools, it's always possible to get to the root cause of an issue. When we look at like common errors, common errors on Fiori look something like, we get like a 403 error or some of the numbered error messages. And the 403 is like a common one, or it says then also error loading tiles, or factory is not displayed, or no service found for namespace. Those are like 403 type errors where it says ultimately I cannot reach the destination. So the application tries to call the backend service, for example, but the backend service doesn't respond or it's not available. That's very often results in a 403 error. So if it says like something like error loading tiles, you can be sure that it's some sort of service issue where maybe no data service is not active, SICF node is not active. Those type of issues can happen. As I mentioned again or earlier, is with the task list in transaction STC01, where we can activate all the OData services, where we can activate all the components. It's less likely to experience that, because this would also be an issue that's for every user. So if we're experiencing some sort of like error loading tiles or a 403 error, that is really something that every user will face. With the content manager, we also have the ability to check services in a catalog. So if we're building custom catalogs, we always have the ability to check the services that are behind the tiles that we're adding to a catalog. And with that, we can also detect those type of issues before they even appear in the Launchpad. We can detect it. We can activate the services right there, and don't even get to experience those type of issues anymore, because we have now the ability to really check it through the content manager. That's one type of issues that's very common. The other one, like the 500 errors, where we have like request failed. That was very common when we had the central hub deployment, where it was primarily due to the fact that the user was missing some SRFC ACL authorizations for trusted RFCs in the backend, or also that a service is not activated in SICF. So the SICF node is inactive. Then it can also be like an error 500. And that will be, right in our phase, we'll see request failed. And I have an example here later where we can see something like that. Obviously, then there's also sometimes like an error message, like we can see here. I'm in an app and it says no change authorizations in company code 001. So that's now obviously something where I'm already in the app. So the app works. So if the app works, what that means is that the services, the SICF nodes, all those OData services, they're active, they're working. So it's not a general problem with the application. This is now a user problem, a user authorization problem, where a user just doesn't have the necessary authorizations to perform the activity. If we're seeing those type of authorizations where really it says, hey, authorization issue, it is an authorization issue, period. What we have in Fiori is a tool that we call the app support. App support is basically a configuration item that we have to configure, that we have to enable and authorize to the end users. And then if they go to their user screen, they can click on app support, and the app support is something like SU53. I also put it here in the title. It's not SU53, but for us security admins, it is like SU53. It's just in Fiori. It's specifically for Fiori. So it's not SU53, but it's exactly the same thing, just in Fiori. And so if a user experiences something like here, where we have like clearly an authorization issue, and I want to understand what it is, we can click on the app support, and then the app support will basically, and I can also make this a little bit bigger, can then show us, what are the errors that we're seeing, whether they're like authorizations related, gateway related, or runtime related. Here I'm just showing gateway errors. So the user on the app support can scroll through them, can see them, can download them, and send them, via ticket or by email, whatever your process is, to the IT security team to report it in the exact same fashion as we did that with SU53. Send a screenshot or we downloaded it and send it to the support team to fix the issue. The app support is configuration, so it's not always active. We have to activate it. I always recommend activate it, because that's a great tool. That's really what our end users need. If they have like an authorization error, they can click on authorization error and they see what authorization object, field, and value they're missing. So very important. And it's same as with SU53. It's basically it needs to be authorized. We have to authorize through a catalog that would be like in a base catalog that's for every user. And then it also comes with an authorization, and the authorization basically dictates whether I can see just authorization issues for myself or whether I can do it for other users as well. And if I can do it for other users, then I have here the user button, and I can basically type in the username, and I can retrieve the errors from another user as well. That's what the authorizations control. So for your IT users, for your security people, you would have the authorizations to see for everyone. And then for the end users, it would just be for themselves, so they can see their own authorization issues, gateway errors, and so on, and then also download and do all that stuff with it. So that's a configuration item that needs to be configured. If you want to learn more, just Google for SAP Fiori app support, and you'll find a ton of blogs from SAP that explain how to configure. It's super straightforward. When it comes to authorizations that are or to issues, or not necessarily issues, but let's say a user is missing or doesn't see all the data that they are expecting to see. So sometimes it could be that I run a T code or an application and I see a set of data, but I'm missing some data. And maybe one of my colleagues, they can see more than I can. So I know, hey, this is an authorization issue, but it doesn't necessarily tell me it's an authorization issue. I can run the app support or I can run a trace, and there's no return codes that are greater than 0 because there's no authorization issue. Everything is fine. With S/4HANA, but also with Fiori, there is like a new approach with that virtual data model, or what I mentioned already with the core data services, where basically the CDS views are a different way of how authorizations or the data is being pulled based on the authorizations a user has. So what does that mean? That means that when I'm running an app or an application that's pulling data from the database, with the CDS views, it's dynamically using my authorizations and only retrieving the data that I'm authorized to see. So what that means, and I have here an example that might be a little bit confusing at first, but let me explain this. So in the classical approach, a GUI transaction, the way that we have known it for the past 20 years, the authorization check happens based on the data available. So, let's say we have a table, like here on the left-hand side, we have a table, item and then bookers for the company code. And I have like MAT 001 all the way to 006. And, it's for different company code, in the field bookers. In the old approach, in, traditional SAP GUI transactions, old approach, it was that, we had a select from the table. So like a select star from the table. And then the data came back from the database with all 6 entries. And then there was an authorization check that basically, kind of looped through all the items, whether I'm allowed to see it or not. And if I was allowed to see it, it was shown to me. And if I wasn't, I had the entry in the trace or in SU53 that I'm missing an authorization. For example, here, I have a return code 4 for bookers 3000, meaning I'm not authorized to see 3000. That's why I'm only seeing, MAT 001, 002, and 003, but 4, 5, and 6, I'm not. And I can clearly see that on the authorization check, 2 passed, 1 did not. And so with that, it was super easy to understand or figure out what was missing. With the CDS approach, that's now different. The CDS approach considers the authorizations I have, and then the database only gives me back what I'm authorized to see. So the authorization check that we can trace, that we can see in SU53, or actually in the trace, what we can see in the trace is always a successful authorization check, because the authorization check is not happening against the company code. It's happening against the object and an activity, for example. So, if I'm displaying, the data that I see here in the table, the authorization check will be on an object with activity 03. And then the authorizations I have to the company codes, that's what's evaluated during the data pull from the database. And if I only have the authorization to 1000 and 2000, then I'm only getting the data back from 1000 and 2000. So this is great from an overall security perspective, because this is really what it should be. The database doesn't give me all the data back and then it's in the memory, and then the application filters out what I'm not allowed to see. I already had in the memory, so it was a lot of data being pulled. So here, the database does all that for us, and the memory only receives the data that I'm actually allowed to see. So it's, from an overall security perspective, a much better approach. This is really what we want to have. Unfortunately for us as a security admins, the problem here really is that we don't see which company code the user was missing. So the user only sees 3 items, but there would be 6, and we don't see anything in the trace that says, hey, you're missing specific authorizations to company code 3000. There's still ways that we can find this out, but it's a little bit more tricky. So if we run a trace, and here I have just a screenshot of the ST auth trace, the authorization trace, basically. We can see here, and here I was basically just tracking on a transaction like MM03. So what I was just saying is those CDS views are not just for Fiori. They're also very popular now with S/4HANA in general. We might not have seen it in ERP as much, but now with S/4HANA, we can definitely see them more. So for example, if a transaction code like MM03 that's been around for years or decades even, there's now enhanced authorization or enhanced checks with CDS views. So when we trace a user, I can see that, and we can only see that through ST auth trace. So if you're still using ST01 and you run the authorization check there, you won't see this information, or you might see it, but you cannot really drill down into it to understand it. So I really recommend to use the new form in ST auth trace. When we run ST auth trace, we have here two new columns. That's called access filtering and CDS entity. And here we can basically see that there was an access filtering with a technical element that's a CDS view. And we see here in this one example where I have it highlighted in yellow, we see there was an authorization check on object M_MAT. So it was the material master authorization object, and it was checking for activity F4. So it was checking for activity F4, and it was requesting what values I have on the field Bagru, so the material group. So if I'm only authorized to one material group, then the database will only give me back the materials that are assigned to that material group, but not all the others. And that's what we see here. So the authorization check is successful, return code 0, because I have M_MAT with F4 with some Bagru, but I might not have a star or not all of the material groups. I might only have some, but it doesn't show here. So what we can do is we can look into that CDS entity, and we can do that by selecting the line and click on CDS access control up here, and then we can see the CDS access control here on the left-hand side. So we see how that access control, that CDS access control, is implemented, and we can see that in the where clause that it's now considering the PFCG authorizations of the user, and it's basically considering the object M_MAT, the field Bagru, where activity is F4 or then activity is 03. So here we can see it's not asking for Bagru equals 1 or equals 2 or equals 3. It just says, give me the values the user has on Bagru, and I will return the data for those Bagrus. That's what the CDS view does. So it's a little bit more tricky to understand what we can really see there. What that means is that from an authorizations perspective, we won't see the authorization issue. And if I go on the right-hand side here, there's obviously tools we can use to find that. So there's the SACM, which is the access control management. And in the access control management, I can run a runtime simulator, and I can simulate the entity against a user. So let me just quickly change my screen here, and we look into that. So if I'm here in the SACM, and we can see here, we have a runtime simulator. And in that runtime simulator, I can select that CDS entity that we found in the authorization trace. I can run that against a particular user and then say here, execute. And now what it does here is basically, this is a little bit an awkward screen sometimes, but we're getting used to it. We can see here on the left-hand side, just high-level overview, like my user Abe Answer has basically full authorizations to what we're requesting. And we can also see it over here. It was requesting M_MAT, and I have full authorizations because ultimately I have a star. If I do another user, let's just quickly see. I hope this still has it, the authorizations, and I have a lot of test users. They always change from one demo to the next. We can see here for my test user, the TABA, I don't have all authorizations. I don't have full authorizations. Why is that? That is because I have specific values that were found. So let me show you that over here. We can see here, oops, I just, the screen, here we go. So we can see here, we have for mmatimat, we have Begru, and then here we have the equal field. And let me move the screen over here. Like I said, this is something a little bit awkward how this has been built here. But you can see here for Begru, I have the value ABC. That's also what we can see over here. So basically, I have multiple instances of mmatimat with the Begru activity F4 or 03, and the value in Begru is ABC. So I don't see everything. I just see the materials that are assigned to material group ABC. And so that's what I have to use here. So it's really more like I have to dig into the authorizations to understand what is actually the issue. And I cannot just directly see it in the trace or in SU53 or in the app support tool. That's a little bit unfortunate, but that's the way it is. We have to get around it, and we have to use the tools to still figure out what is the issue. It will be more tricky for the users because they don't see it, and we have to dig a little bit more, and we have to get to use, and we have to start looking deeper, and it might take a little bit more time, but this is just what it is. It's better from an overall security perspective, a little bit more headache for us. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it, so that we all know what we have to do there. So keep that in mind when it comes to the CDS views. I want to show you another thing as well. So let me switch over to my other screen. Just give me 1 second here. So I'm going to go here. So here I'm on the Fiori Launchpad, and I want to show you just very quickly the app support. So let's say I just start like a manage house banks app here, just an app here that I have, and let's don't do too much here. I just go in here and say okay. And we can see up here, if I go to the user, I have here the app support. So this is basically what I was just referring earlier. And I can go in here, and then I see a little bit of information about the app I'm currently in. So here I'm in like a GUI. It's basically a transaction code that I just opened. This is a GUI app. And then over here, I would see my authorization errors, my gateway errors, and also my runtime errors. And this is what the user can do. So in here, this is basically controlled by authorization. So if I want to look into another user, I need to be authorized to do that. And then I can also look into another user and see what authorization issues that particular user had. So this is what the app support does for us. And this is really, the app support is really helpful sometimes for gateway situations, but primarily also when there's like a true, like an SU53 type of situation where the user's missing authorizations, and then the app support would show me that. Unfortunately, with the CDS views, it's a little bit trickier because in the app support, we won't see the failed authorization because, again, there is no failed authorization. The CDS view doesn't have, or it has failed authorizations. I have to correct myself there. There could potentially be failed authorizations on the CDS view, but it's very unlikely because it's more a type situation where the user doesn't even have the authorization object at all. So if I don't have any authorization to mmatimat, then obviously I will get a return code that's greater than 0, and I would have an authorization failure. But that's very unlikely and should never happen, because if I have the transaction code, or if I have the Fiori UI 5 application, and I've done just a somewhat solid job in authorizing the app properly, the user will have an instance of mmatimat or whatever that authorization object is. They might not have the full access to the object because it's restricted, but at least they have the object, and therefore there's no failed authorization check. It will always be return code 0, but we don't have all the authorizations that the data has that we need for the data to show. That's kind of like what I wanted to mention there. Sometimes, like I was mentioning before, we have issues like I have here with my Display House Banks app. So if I click on the Display House Banks app, unless someone just changed something, a minute ago it was just working as an issue. Let me refresh very quickly. I was hoping to see an error, but then there's the demo, and whenever I do a demo, it doesn't work as expected. It just worked 20 or 36 minutes ago. Let me quickly go back to this page here. Let me quickly check my catalog, display house bank. So what I'm hoping to see here is basically like a type 500 or a 403 error where it says, error loading tile, or tile cannot be loaded, where I cannot even get into the house bank app altogether, which I think now we cannot. So this can sometimes happen where the app just doesn't work. This is a general error with the app. And what I just quickly want to show you here is the ability with the developer tools. So every browser has developer tools, and depending, I'm using Chrome here. If you use Edge or Internet Explorer, and the recommendation really is with Chrome or Edge, not necessarily IE. There's a developer tools, and if you click on the developer tools, we get like another window here within the window that shows me different information about what's going on here. And we can see here there's a console, there's network, there's different things we can see. What I primarily use here is the console. And we see there's a lot of error messages here. So obviously, if I want to see what's going on, I could also right click and say, hey, clear the console, and then maybe refresh here. And then I can see what is happening on a server level. And so here I have like a 404 error where I have like a not found. So we see here there's trying to get data or trying to call an OData service, and there's not a lot of other errors now. Let's quickly go back up here. If it lets me. No, it doesn't want to let me go. Here we go. And we can see it's trying to connect to a OData service. So this is a service that's behind that Fiori application, and I get a 404 error. That means not found. So you see here the app doesn't work. That means there is an issue with the app itself. That's because here, and I can clearly see it here, that OData service is not working. If we have these type of errors, I just clicked on it, we can obviously, or what we have to do is we have to activate these services. And we have tools for that, or we can use the content manager for it. The content manager is really the best way to do it. And I want to quickly show you that as well. So if I go back into the, and I have it open here already because I was just deactivating it before the session. That's why I was like, it really shouldn't work. If you're here in the content manager, and remember the transaction code, I'll show it here once again. It's that UI2 FLPCM_custom, which should always work in the customizing mode. I have here my catalog that I built for the webinar. And in that catalog, I have different tiles and target mappings. And here we can see I have like that manage the display house bank. And this is the one I deactivated. So how could we find that here? And I will show that in another session. We can, in the content manager, we can select the catalog, and then we can click here on check services. And we can either just click check services, then it will just do it here, and we get the service activation status here, and we can see that it's red, so something is missing there. I can also here check services and show services, and this is really what I always recommend to do. This is what I always do. I can check, and then it will change with a view, and it will show me all the services that the catalog requires. And then here I can see this is the one that is missing, where the ICF service is not active. And this ultimately correlates here to what we saw here. So we can see that here, that FCLM BAM ES, that's that service that's not active. So we can be proactive when we build a catalog. I always check for services because I don't want to have these type of errors. So if we do an implementation, we build catalogs, always check the services. And if there's one missing, just go and maintain them. And we can do that, right here. We just go to activate and maintain services, and then we can search them there, and we can, I just copied it, and we can just search it here. And if the service exists, then we should be able to see it here. So we can see here the service exists. If it doesn't exist, then we have to add it. We can do all that directly here in the content manager, or navigating from the content manager into the activate and maintain service transaction. And then here you can see it's not active. So I activate this one. Now it's green. If I go back and would run the check here again. So if we refresh here, we can see it's green. And then ultimately, if I go back to my Fiori Launchpad, and let me clean here the console, and I refresh, now this app should actually work. So now I'm just refreshing. We can see there's a couple of other issues still, but now we can see the app is loading. And now you can see here that app now works. So we get, and then here I can do stuff. And so once an app works, like I can see it here, then all the services are running. We're fine from that perspective. And if I now have an issue within the system or within the app, that's then really more authorizations related, where we use the traces and all that information to get to the root cause of the issue. So with that being said, there are different issues that can happen with Fiori. Little tricky sometimes to understand where they are. If we're implementing Fiori and we're experiencing, the first time we're running applications where they don't run or don't work, that's very often like OData services, ICF nodes related. Use the task list because it will do the activation for you. When you build the catalogs, run the check services. If you see a red, then the app won't work. If the service doesn't work, the app won't work. So those type of issues we can solve. The authorization issues between the trusted RFCs, between front end and back end, that shouldn't be a problem if we're in embedded. That was more like in central hub deployment with the embedded. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. And then really the rest is authorizations related. And that's as long as it's not a CDS view, we'll see it through the app support. We can see there are issues. And if we don't see it in the app support and we trace and we can see it's a CDS entity, then we have to go a little bit deeper and learn to understand the CDS entity. For me, and I just go back here once again on that CDS entity, if we have a type of situations like here, I don't even have to go and look into the CDS entity. I know straight away what it is because it shows me here matimat activity F4 and the field that was requested was backroom. So I know I'm missing backroom. There must be material groups that the user is not authorized to see. That's why they're not seeing all the data. And if I have something like that, the SACM, I can obviously see what the user is authorized for, but we can also use SEO56 and just look in the user buffer, select on that object and see what authorizations the user has. There's different ways how we can go about it. The SACM, the runtime simulator in particular, that allows me to here, type in the username to see how they're authorized. It's a great tool. SEO56 does the same thing. And from there, then we have to understand, what is missing. If we know what material groups there are, if there are only like 10 and the user only has 2, then we know it. Same as company codes. There's no way it will tell us what exactly was missing because it doesn't check for that anymore. Just that's the way that authorization check with the CDS entities works. With that was just a quick rundown on the authorization debugging. We have more sessions coming up. We have one already planned. That's an overview and talking about different use cases in SAP Cloud IHE. IHE is the Identity Access Governance tool, a cloud solution from SAP that runs on the Business Technology Platform, the BTP. And it's basically the equivalent of SAP Access Control. So it's the access control solution in the cloud that can extend existing SAP Access Control implementation. It could potentially also replace an access control implementation depending on the requirements and the needs you have. We'll talk about that and look into what IHE offers, what it does, and the differences between IHE standalone, using it in combination with access control. So really getting a good overview what IHE is all about. After that, we'll have more sessions. We're getting towards the end of the year, so we have to see how is the planning, how it goes. But we have more sessions, so just keep up to date with the newsletter. We're trying to post as much as we can. Follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow myself, follow the company. Just search for Exciting, follow us, and then you will know, be informed about the next webinars. With that, as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me via email, via LinkedIn. I will be traveling to the GRC conference in Vienna next week, to the SAP Insider EMEA conference next week. So if you happen to be there, I'll be there having a presentation about SAP S for HANA migrations from a security perspective. Will be on Thursday afternoon, I believe, and then also I'll be in the lounges, in the expert lounges, talking about Fiori security, S for HANA security, but also access control and IAG. So if you happen to be there, stop by and say hi. And if you have any other questions, shoot me an email or on LinkedIn. I try to get to all the messages and reply. And with that, thank you very much for your attention and see you in the next one. Have a good rest of your day.